breiten Faust an Lanzenschaft, die Zügel in der Linken, so springt des Reiches Ritterschaft und ihre Schwerter blinken. Hey, ja, hey, 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 ja, und ihre Schwerter blinken. Hey, ja, hey, 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 ja, und ihre Schwerter blinken.
Hello and welcome to Lex Orandi, Lex Credendi. I am Kenny, and I was going to go over the tradition of communion on the tongue rather than in the hand, which, by the way, is a sacrilege if you take it in the hand, for various reasons. I've got two articles I'm going to read, one from the Society of St. Pius X, the other from CatholicTradition.org. So starting with the Society of St. Pius X, just talking about the most striking change of the Novus Ordo Mass, where it departed from the Catholic tradition. Okay, from the Society of St. Pius X. A most striking change. The Catholic faith is manifested through the Church's official prayers, the liturgy of which the Mass is the most perfect expression. Since the Second Vatican Council, the nature of the Mass has been significantly altered by a new rite. One of the most controversial issues within the Catholic Church today is the question of the new Mass, or Novus Ordo Missae. This Novus Ordo Missae, or new way of saying Mass, was introduced in 1969 by Pope Paul the Sixth. An idea behind the changes, the liturgists in charge of elaborating the new rite, Archbishop Annibale Bugnini, made it clear that the main intention was to design a rite able to enforce the new ecumenism adopted by the Second Vatican Council. He declared in 1965, "We must strip from our Catholic prayers and from the Catholic liturgy everything which can be a shadow of a stumbling block for our separated brethren, that is, for the Protestants." To accomplish this ecumenical goal, he solicited the help of 6 Protestant ministers. Again, big problem. The focus on man. In the new rite, man has become more of the focus, not so much God. The priest and the faithful gather for a meal to share with one another Christ's loving presence. This desire, man-centered liturgy has produced noticeable changes, using vernacular language, introducing Mass facing the people, and equating the laity's role with that of the priest. Even the Blessed Sacrament has been removed from the visible center in the church and is often reserved away from the main altar and out of view. Now, obviously, if you go to Mass here in Wichita Falls, they do actually have the tabernacle center behind the altar. Now, when I first got to Sacred Heart, they did have it off to the side, which, at the time when I first became Catholic, I didn't really see that as a big deal because I had not yet fully comprehended everything in the faith yet. But after I can't even remember which priest it was, but we had our first priest and then second, and then he moved it, center focus. And so not all Novus Ordo churches do this, but a lot of them do. And I've seen them with, straight up, like not even having it anywhere near the altar, like it's in a completely different room, which kind of destroys the whole point of going to a church when there's no mass. Like you have to go to a little side chapel. But anyway, I mean, they do that in Rome for certain altars, but that is actually logical there because you've got people coming in as tourists, and they're not always dressed appropriately and not always having most appropriate conversations in the presence of the Eucharist. So that makes sense. All right, continuing. Also, many abuses have been introduced, such as lay Eucharistic ministers, communion in the hand, and altar girls. Even Vatican II's instruction that Gregorian chants should be given pride of place is ignored. Very true. The consequences of these changes have been, among many others, a shocking reduction in the number of religious vocations and a decrease in weekly attendance at Mass. Oh, sorry about that. Sacramental confession as an important preparation before receiving the Eucharist has also steadily declined. Focus on God. The traditional Mass, on the contrary, focuses on the worship of God and the true sacrificial nature of the Mass. The Catholic Church teaches that Jesus Christ, through the priest, offers his body and blood to his Father in atonement for all the sins of humanity. Holy Communion is a consequence of this sacrifice and allows men to receive the effects of the sacrifice of reparation. The use of the sacred language, such as Latin, for the worship of God, the many signs of respect and adoration to show loving submission to him, the unique role of the ordained priest who takes the place of Christ at the altar, or he's in persona Christi, a reverent and humble reception of Holy Communion, kneeling with the host placed on the tongue, the awe-inspiring sacred chant are all indicative, there we go, of how the Mass directs us to God. The return to tradition. A return to the traditional form of the liturgy has consistently produced an increase in vocations, a better attendance at Sunday and even at daily Mass, a more frequent use of the sacrament of penance, and overall heightened awareness of the sacred, sacrificial nature of the liturgy. The traditional Mass and all of the doctrine that it conveys is the means for a true restoration of all things in Christ. For anybody, if you have ever been to a traditional Latin Mass, like I have many, many times, there is, aside from, the four said differences, communion in the hand, which is just sacrilegious, altar girls, the Mass being in the vernacular, all of these like extreme differences between the two Masses. One of the things I have noticed is that you go to a Novus Ordo Mass and the gray heads outnumber the younger heads, especially children. Like the Novus Ordo is dying slowly, but it's dying. it's only the artificial injection of basically the immigrant population. I mean, I know that that's probably not going to be taken quite the right way when I say that, but it's true. The immigrant population, and like when I first became Catholic, I think there was like 20 or so people, something like that, whenever I became Catholic, and even the people that came in before me, because whenever I first started the RCIA class, I came in too late, so I couldn't come into the church that year. So I saw the guys before me go through, so I already knew what was going to happen. And yeah, it was the same thing. They had like 20 people, and I think the year after that they had 20 people, and then all of a sudden it's like you got like 3, 4, 5 people every year, and it's just steadily dropping. Because nobody can take the Novus Ordo seriously. Nobody can take Catholicism seriously because of the Novus Ordo. It's watered down. It's Protestant. Nobody likes it. Now, contrasting that with what you see at the Latin Mass, uh, I go there and I see, entire family, like, mom, dad, and kids take up an entire pew, like a bunch of little kids, and they're all well behaved. Unlike in the Novus Ordo, where the kids are like bouncing off the walls and you have to have a cry room. Like, okay, fine. Even at the Latin Mass, you do have some kids that cry, babies, toddlers, kids will be kids. But like, I see parents in the Novus Ordo trying to like get their kids to like sit down, pay attention, kneel, and pray, and they can't get them to do it. They have to give them a coloring book or something, give them something to distract them, give them food. Latin Rite, I mean, for the most part, that's not even a problem, other than just the one little odd kid that's being a brat. And, literally, you got little girls with veils on, praying. Little boys, dressed in suits, praying. Sometimes with a rosary. Now, whether they bring the rosary or not, that's a whole other subject, but they've got one. And so it's a very even mix of all generations and all ethnic backgrounds in the traditional Latin Mass. And so that's just something you don't have in the Novus Ordo. Like, it's a hippie, and I can't even remember who said it now, but somebody referred to, and another priest that didn't even say it actually got in trouble for saying it when he didn't even actually say it, but referring to the Novus Ordo as like a Fisher-Price Mass. Because, I mean, really, the Latin Mass is for adults, and then the Novus Ordo is for children. I mean, that's no other way to put it. All right. So, those are the differences that I've noticed. And tradition is thriving, which I think is why they're trying to kill it. They're trying to get all the people that are fervent, the young families, and get them back into the Novus Ordo, because they know that the Novus Ordo is just dying. And so it's an artificial attempt at, resuscitating the Novus Ordo, when it's like, no, these people will just go to the SSPX, or they'll go to a Sedevacantis Mass or an independent priest. They're not going back to the Novus Ordo for the most part, other than those few people who have scruples of conscience, and they're like, okay, I've got to go to a Mass, so if the Novus Ordo is all there is, then I'll go. But for the most part, if they've got families, they're like, no, I'm not subjecting my kids to the Novus Ordo. All right, next article. Now these guys, I've only recently discovered this site, CatholicTradition.org. I think I may have seen a few of their articles before, but I didn't really pay attention to what site it was on, because it looks familiar. But they're just going over, like, quotes from statements from Pope, saints, and church councils, and they're giving stuff as early as 155 AD. So, these are just quotes about the apostolic tradition of receiving on the tongue rather than on the hand. So, continuing. The doctrine of the church tells us communion on the tongue is an apostolic tradition. Statement from popes, saints, and church councils. Saint Sixtus I, 115 AD. The sacred vessels are not to be handled by others than those consecrated to the Lord. Saint Basil the Great, Doctor of the Church, AD 330 to 379. The right to receive Holy Communion in the hand is permitted only in times of persecution. Now, clarification, persecution means like you're in prison and, you're not being allowed to see a priest or receive communion or nothing. And so the priest has to sneak in undercover and be like, here, here's communion. And you take it in the hand and you take it yourself. You self-administer. That's what that means. Now, that's an extreme example, but that is one example of what it means by in times of persecution. All right, continuing. Saint Basil the Great considered communion in the hand so irregular that he did not hesitate to consider it a grave fault. So the same guy who said that it is permitted in times of persecution also says that it is a grave fault. So there you go. The Council of Saragossa, 380 AD, excommunicated anyone who dared to continue receiving Holy Communion in the hand. This was confirmed by the Synod of Toledo. The Synod of Rouen, 650 AD, condemned communion in the hand. Condemned communion in the hand, and ordered it to be, and brought it to ordered that it be halted in widespread abuses that occurred from this practice, and as a safeguard against sacrilege. So basically, they stopped, and I know I just totally babbled that whole thing, but basically, it's saying that to avoid sacrilege, because in the early church, of course, they had to do everything underground. Everything was persecution at that time, so they were receiving it in the hand, and there was a special protocol that you had to do to avoid sacrilege. But now, in the time in which this is being written, they're saying no, to avoid any possibility of abuse, communion in the hand no more. Because if particles hit the ground, that's sacrilege, because then you're trampling on Jesus whenever you go up to receive. And all of this and basically just think of all the things that could possibly go wrong. You drop the host. The reason you only take the Eucharist in one species, meaning the host and not the chalice, just the host, is so you don't spill the wine. Or it was also to avoid the heresy that the body and the blood were separate, and you had to have both the host and the chalice in order to have the complete Eucharist. And it's no, that's heresy. You get the whole thing, body, blood, soul, and divinity in both the chalice and the host. So there were all sorts of reasons why they did that. But continuing. Okay, Sixth Ecumenical Council at Constantinople, 680 to 681 AD, forbade the faithful to take the sacred host in their hand, threatening transgressors with excommunication. Obviously, they took this seriously. St. Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274 AD. Out of reverence towards this sacrament, the Holy Eucharist, nothing touches it but what is consecrated, Hence, the corporal and the chalice are consecrated, and likewise the priest's hands are hands for touching this sacrament. Summa Theologica, Part 3. I need to get the whole Summa Theologica so I can actually read the whole thing. I've read parts of it from quotes and, little bits that I can find online, but I need to get the whole thing so I can read it. Okay, the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1565. The fact that only the priest gives Holy Communion with his consecrated hands is apostolic tradition. That is the Council of Trent. So, for those who are still receiving in the hand, possibly out of ignorance or stubbornness or just a fear of, like, this was my problem, and I've always had this problem. I hate making changes that everybody's going to see, because then it's like, because I hate comments. Like, it drives me insane. When people are like, oh, dude, it's like, that's a nice change. I don't like that. So if you're doing communion in the hand for any of those reasons, self-consciousness, stubbornness, ignorance, whatever it is, start kneeling and receiving it on the tongue. If you can't kneel, just stick your tongue out. Priest will put it on there. All right. Pope Paul VI, 1963 to 1978. This method on the tongue must be retained. Memorabile Domini. Or, hang on, I misread that. See, I'm not very good at Latin. I know some. I know enough to do the rosary and all that, but I have to like really read it slowly and pay attention to what I'm reading. Otherwise, I'll totally screw it up. Memoriale Domini. There we go. See, that's why I couldn't say it. It's too many like roller coaster vowels there. Anyway, now this here is a criticism of John Paul II. So sorry to any JP2 fans, but they did make a very what do you call it? It was a very truthful critique of JP2. Okay, Pope John Paul II, to touch the sacred species and to distribute them with their own hands is a privilege of the ordained. Dominique Chene, 11. Okay, so he made this statement, but in this next paragraph, it explains how, even though he said that, he flaked on it, I guess, or backed off on that statement. Okay, Pope John Paul II violated the apostolic tradition, which, no, not John Paul II. Pope John II violated actually, I think that's a typo. I think that's supposed to be John Paul II. Okay, John Paul II violated the apostolic tradition, which must not be altered, when he did not stop the practice of communion in the hand distributed by the non-ordained. Interestingly, he and the other popes of the Second Vatican Council never gave permission for self-administration by the non-ordained, but did not stop to think in their blind spot that communion in the hand is self-administration, because until the host enters the mouth, which invariably involves the tongue by physical necessity, any action involving the hand is administered, not receiving. The only part of the human body that is capable of receiving the host for consummation is the tongue. Since all food must pass over and on the tongue to be swallowed, otherwise there is no other way to avoid choking. All right. So basically, John Paul II, instead of just going, oh, communion in the hand's been going on, this is a sacrilege, we need to knock it off. Even though he just basically stated up here earlier, to touch the sacred species and to distribute them with their own hands is the privilege of the ordained. In other words, the priests. So there you go. All right, only a few more. Pope St. Leo the Great is less well known for something very important to liturgical studies. He is one of the most ancient witnesses to the practice of communion on the tongue. Notably, St. Leo the Great is the sixth. St. Leo the Great read the 6th chapter of St. John's Gospel as referring to the Eucharist, as all the church fathers did, in a preserved sermon on John 6, Sermon 9. St. Leo says, okay, this is all in Latin. Hang on. Hoc enim ores sumitur quod fide creditur. I'll have to translate that. In fact, let's just do that right quick, because I am still learning Latin, and I am not very good at it yet. Okay, so we need a Latin. That's not what I wanted. There we go. Okay. So, hoc enim ore simitur quod fide creditur. Sermon 91:3. For this is received by the mouth that is believed by faith. So basically, the Eucharist is only to be received on the tongue, period. With, of course, that one exception. Well, 2 exceptions if you count the persecution thing, but the one exception being that the priest is allowed to self-communicate just because he's the priest. So, there you go. Okay. Oh, here we go. I didn't even need to translate it. It's right here. This is translated strictly as, this indeed is received by means of the mouth, which we believe by means of faith. Ore it is here in the ablative, and in the context it denotes instrumentation. So then the mouth is the means by which the Holy Eucharist is received. Okay. The Council of Rouen, 650 AD. Do not put the Eucharist in the hands of any layman or laywoman, but only in their mouths. Agreed. All right, so in conclusion, do not receive in the hand, receive only kneeling and on the tongue. Unless you happen to be a priest, which I don't know that any priests are watching anything I have anything to put on here. And so, yeah, just don't do it. Receiving in the hand was a Protestant innovation, which was intended to destroy belief in the Eucharist. And now that we've had, how many years of the Novus Ordo now? So, let's see. Let's just round it to 1970, because it was 1969 when the Novus Ordo did its thing. So 70, 80, 90, 2000, 2010, 20. Almost 60 years now. or probably is 60 years now, of the Novus Ordo, and now we have a situation where, like, the vast majority, I think it was like 70% of Catholics that attend Mass regularly. Now, bear in mind, this is at the Novus Ordo. 70% do not believe that the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. That's the consequence of communion in the hand. That is what the Protestants did it for. They wanted to destroy belief in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Now, of course, in the Latin Mass, well, we'll do the statistic in. Well, no, actually, it's not in reverse. I was thinking, yeah, because like the vast majority of people that go to the Latin Mass, they all believe in the real presence, like almost down to like it's single digits people that don't believe in it. I think it was like 2%. Even I think that's kind of high for the traditional Mass, for people not to believe in it, in the true presence of the Holy Eucharist, or the true presence of Christ in the Holy Eucharist. Because generally speaking, the traditional Catholics are the most faithful Catholics you will ever find in the Catholic Church. So I do think 2% is a little high. I mean, unless that statistic was taken when you had a bunch of Novus Ordo Catholics, seeking out a Mass during the hoax, because all the Masses were shut down. And so they were looking for anywhere they had the sacraments, and then they ended up in a Latin Mass. And probably statistics got taken during that time, and maybe that's why it was so high. It's just because you had so many people going from the Novus Ordo to the Latin Mass, just trying to find the sacraments. Or just to find a place to take their kids so that they can see that going to Mass is at least important. Who knows? All right, well, that's all I have for now. So until next time, Deus Vult.